Hello and welcome to the Unnamed Automotive Podcast. My name is Sammy Hajjasad, and with me, as always, is my good friend and fellow automotive journalist, Benjamin Hunting. Say hi to the people, Ben.
Greetings, human listeners.
Greetings to everyone. If this is the first time you're listening to our podcast, thank you for trying something new. Me and Ben have been doing this for, I think, nearly 10 years now.
Amazing.
And,
I've never done anything for 10 years.
That's not true.
It is true.
You've done this for 10 years.
That's true. That's the only thing.
And the career that surrounds this, because Ben is a professional automotive journalist, as am I.
Yeah, but that career is constantly changing. Like, do you have an outlet that you're writing for now that you were writing for 10 years ago?
No, absolutely not.
I have almosts, but again, no 10 years.
Even the publications that I was writing for 10 years ago is a very different publication than it.
Now, how many of them exist?
Yeah, that's true. Ben, what's up, man?
I'm just here talking about cars with
and publications.
My longtime associate, Sammy Hajjasad.
And publications. So why don't we tell your listeners where they can find your latest work? And I'll do the same when you're done.
You can find my latest work at Haggerty, at Motor Trend, and at autotrader.ca.
And you can find my work at driving.ca and autotrader.ca, as well as driving.ca's YouTube channel. They just published a Volkswagen Atlas review. That's what they did recently. Of me, with me in it. Of me or with me in it. I hosted a video review of the Volkswagen Atlas on their YouTube channel. It's going very nicely.
Didn't they just debut the 2027 redesign?
Yeah, in fact, I talked mostly about the Atlas on this podcast before this video was revealed. So anybody who's listened to this podcast already knows what I'm going to say in that video, I think.
That's the advantage of subscribing to our podcast is you get the driving YouTube channel like 2 or 3 weeks in advance.
Yeah. You get all of our thoughts 2 or 3 weeks in advance.
Too many thoughts.
And it's a lot, man. I'm always thinking, I wish we didn't have to.
You wish we didn't have to think? Like everything was just autonomous?
No, I wish that our responsibilities in life did not require us to constantly be thinking.
Okay. All right,
yeah.
You heard it here first. Sammy wants to return to a fish-like existence.
Yeah, vegetated. You think the fish aren't thinking?
I think some fish aren't thinking.
Yeah, I want to be the non-thinking fish. I want to be a potato, or maybe another root vegetable.
I'm not a fish expert, and I'm not a potato expert.
But then again, the potatoes are making electricity, aren't they? So they must be thinking.
Potatoes are making electricity? Where are we going with this? Is this the automotive disinformation podcast now?
Do you really think they're not making electricity?
Pop your hood, put a potato where the battery should be.
Exactly.
Try to start your car. Tell me what happens.
I'm going to try.
You don't have to tell me what happens. I know what's going to happen, but you can tell me. Anyway.
Fried potato, baby.
This week we're going to be talking about a car that we really, really like, but depending on where you live, we like it more or less, which is...
Oh, yeah, no. But depending on where you live, it is an entirely different conversation. So we're going to have basically two talks about the same car today.
It's an unusual situation. It is, of course, the 2026 Chevrolet Trax. Trax is a longtime all-star on Unnamed Automotive Podcast.
No,
although
I don't know if that's true, because the first generation Trax was really nothing special.
Well, that's the thing. When I say long time, I really mean since like 2024 when it was redesigned.
Yeah.
The Trax,
which felt like a lot. We've been dealing with so much over the past 2 years.
It's been 2024 for 3 years now.
Exactly.
There is a Buick version of the Trax as well called the Invista, which we've talked about on the show multiple times. It's
also a good car.
Yeah, it's somewhat more luxurious than the Trax in terms of interior, and the exterior styling is smoother. But I will say this: I think the outside of the Trax looks pretty good. It's
okay. It is very clearly like it feels like it's based on a car. It feels like it's based on a car.
But if you get it in a color, like you can get a red and a blue, and I think you used to be able to get like a green kind of that was nice.
Very sage.
Yeah, sage. Okay,
very matcha.
Those are not the same thing, but continuing on.
Very evergreen.
Very minty.
Very minty.
If you get the the tracks in a color, you can see the details of the tracks much better than you can. Mine was in black. It had something called the Midnight Package, which is
So it was more than just black. It was black with additional black bits.
yeah, they like black mirrors, black wheels.
It's as if they didn't want you to see any of those details that you were just about to
It's
mention.
odd. I don't know what the fascination is with black. I own a black car. Because
It's the worst. Me too. It's constantly dirty.
it was only sold in 2 colors though, my car. So like I didn't really have a choice. But it's not as appealing in black, I think, because the other thing about black that on a crossover is it contrasts against the plastic on the fenders. You know what I mean?
Yeah. If it's not like color matched to that body cladding, it looks off.
And the cladding will fade at a different rate than the black, and over time that can be the worst case scenario for this is the Via Cross, which has like you often see these Via Crosses that are totally faded on the plastic, and they have huge amounts of plastic.
Let's take a step back. Not everyone is on a first name basis with the Via Cross. Can you please give it a year and model and make and model?
Late 90s to early 2000s Isuzu Via Cross.
And a very special car in our hearts that has become a one named car here.
More so than the Trax.
More so than the Trax.
Fun fact, I went to the original Trax's debut.
Me too.
2016, I think, in San Francisco, I want to say.
I went to one in Ottawa.
That's a very different experience.
It was a very different experience.
For me, it was a combined Trax and couldn't have been 2016. It was a combined Trax and Sonic experience. So maybe it was 2013.
It was among one of my first press drives in Canada. And here's what I remember. We went to Ottawa. I drove this car in some very snowy weather. I met a guy who was like, I don't know if he was domesticating or just like rescuing raccoons.
I don't think they can be domesticated. I think they're always
he had
wild.
one, and he was really obsessed with telling us about this fact that he had to help them pee.
Okay. Well,
the more I think about the retelling of that story, the worse it got.
How did you meet that person?
He was at the lodge, a part of he was one of the sideshows that accompany these events that the automaker put on. He was brought in by Chevrolet
to do what?
With raccoons? I don't know. Yeah, with the raccoons to show that we were out in nature or something.
Okay, so the raccoons were indoors.
Yeah.
That does seem a bit domesticated.
It was so silly.
My experience was very different. I believe it was a dual Trax and Sonic event. I was there with a friend journalist from Quebec whose name I will not bring up because of what happened. But this person...
So the Trax in general was a problematic event, I guess.
Well, this person was a huge Metallica fan, and the drive route that we were on took us through, I guess, Marin County on the other side of the bay from San Francisco. And in that area in general is where James Hetfield lives. Do you know James Hetfield?
You're gonna have to spell it out for me.
Lead singer and guitarist for Metallica.
And how did you guys embarrass yourselves?
Well, my driving companion was pretty sure he knew where Hetfield lived. And so we ended up in what looked like a gated community up a mountain. And we pulled into a driveway and into a yard of a house. We're not just out front of the house. We're in the yard of this house. And at that point, I was kind of like, maybe we shouldn't be here. There didn't seem to be anyone home. And my companion was like, no, this is definitely where Hetfield lives. So I went to James Hetfield's house, but Hetfield did not know that. Okay. And then we left. So that was weird. Because
it just seems like the first generation Trax was somewhat cursed, it seems.
I believe technically what we did was called trespassing.
I don't know about technically. We'll let the legal.
Well, it's been more than a decade, so I think that the statute of limitations on trespassing has expired. So I'm okay.
You better hope so.
Story. Yeah, or I'm gonna get Hetfield's gonna land on my lawn in a helicopter and.
And ask you for your co-driver
and take my house from me.
Oh man!
So back to the Trax. Trax now is very different than Trax then.
Mhm.
The exterior, I think, looks really good. Get it in a color if you want to see more details. There's 2 new colors this year. You can get something called Crimson Metallic and something called Nitro Yellow Metallic. Oh, no, sorry. Scratch that. Those colors are gone. They've been replaced.
Thank goodness.
They've been replaced
Nitro
by
yellow is not what I would imagine. Nitro to me is a very fiery color.
Nitro to me is something that you push a button in the Iron Man Stewart off-road game and you can boost your car, your video game.
What color was that button?
I think it was yellow. So the Crimson Metallic, Nitro Yellow are gone. They're replaced by White Sands and Apex Red. There aren't really any other differences. In Canada, though, one thing that are perhaps in the United States as well, I drove a 1RS trim level of the vehicle. That is the base model of the Trax. However, 4 years ago, the Trax was available. What was 4 years ago? 3 years ago when it first debuted, you could get an LS version, I believe it was called. And that was the real entry level. The reason I'm bringing this up is because it's a tale of 2 Traxes. In the United States today, the Trax starts at 23 grand and it goes up to 27,000. That includes destination. That's very, very competitive. There are a lot of vehicles at around 23,000 that are comparable to the Trax that you might want to consider, but the Trax is very much in the conversation there. It is in fact the second cheapest car you can buy in the States. I believe the Venue is the only less expensive vehicle. However, in Canada, the Trax now starts at 30,000 Canadian. That is $6,000 more than it cost 3 years ago. A big part of that is because the LS trim is gone. But even still, every single year from 24, 25 to 26, the Trax has gone up in price. Features have not changed. It is still the 1RS basically that you were getting 3 years ago. Now, this is something that we've noticed in a number of affordable cars, Sammy. Yeah. I think the biggest offender here is the Maverick.
Yes. And I think maybe when the Kicks got a redesign, it also went up significantly in price.
Yeah, the Kicks is now about $29,900. But as you said, it's redesigned. You can also get all-wheel drive with it, which you couldn't before.
And all sorts of like tech stuff that the old one didn't really have.
The Maverick has gone up in the United States, at least, I believe, $7,000, which is like...
and has gained nothing on that entry-level model.
Yeah. The Trax, so now we have the situation where I really, really like the Trax if you live in the United States. If you live in Canada, I think you could maybe do better if you're looking for basic transportation. And that's because the Venue is $5,000 less. The Seltos is $1,000 less. The Elantra is $4,000 less. And the Sentra is $2,000 less. That's 4 vehicles that are cheaper than the Trax. That's double the number that are cheaper versus the US market.
I have to be clear. The Venue is a car that I could not recommend. I just cannot recommend
I've never driven it.
It is
but
not,
if you're looking,
if you thought the old Hyundai accent was a bit basic, this is somehow it's worse. Like it's somehow worse.
If you're looking for the cheapest car you can get, though.
Yeah, that's the only reason to get it. That's all I got to be clear on. I do not recommend the accent unless you're really stuck to a very, very strict budget and you can't get a used car. But the other cars you mentioned are exceptionally good. I do find the Seltos to be somewhat decent, and the Elantra is a fantastic car.
And in Canada, as I mentioned, the Kicks is now $29,900 or $29 something, which puts it right up there with the Trax. But the vehicle has been redesigned much more recently. It looks more modern. The interior feels a bit more modern, et cetera, et cetera. I want to get back to what I like about the Trax because there are a bunch of things that are good about it.
Well, we used to really like the price. That used to be like the one thing I used to really like.
And I still really like it in the States.
Okay.
So the interior of the vehicle is very basic. And by basic, I mean the RS model, which is now the base, you get a 8-inch infotainment screen, but there's not a lot going on there. Pretty much everything you're going to do is going to come from your phone. So you're going to be using Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. There's no navigation. There's none of that stuff. There's an 11-inch infotainment screen on higher trim levels. I think you have to get to the LT or higher to do that. The analog gauges are a nice throwback. It's actually fine. I'm totally into it. My car also
I love that they're a throwback. They're not. They're just, that's the way like gauges work, you know?
No, but they're a throwback in the sense that they're not fake analog gauges. They're actually, made of plastic and they're in there. And the screen that's between them is like a single color LCD screen. It's a 3.5-inch screen on the RS. You can get a much larger 8-inch infotainment cluster on higher trim levels if you want. But I just, if I'm looking at basic transportation, if it's just going to be getting me to work and back and I don't think about it for anything else, I think that's kind of appealing. I don't need all the distractions. The interior is also it's very plasticky. Don't get me wrong. It's gray and it's black. There's some red stitching, and highlights. But again, you will see where the cost cutting went in, and that is the interior of the vehicle. But it is comfortable. And in fact, I had a family visit for the weekend, and we went all over the area in this Trax. 4 adults. The back seat was fine. And in fact, the cargo area is almost as big as the Equinox that I had last week, which is like a class above vehicle. And in fact, I think it's bigger than the CX-50 or like the same size.
You're talking about the rear seat space or the cargo space?
The cargo space.
Wow.
Yeah. So
and even while people are able to sit
that's total seat. Cargo space. But the actual amount while people are sitting is still pretty good too. I want to say it's 25.6 cubic feet, and it's 54 with the back row down. So that you're beating vehicles like the GTI, for example, quite handily, and you're tying the CX-50. It's very, very close, and very, very close to the Equinox, which is in the same showroom. Okay. So I was impressed with that. That's not something that I expected. And when you look at the Trax, it looks small. Like it does, like you don't think that it's going to be very useful, and it turns out that it is. The comfort level inside, people riding in the back didn't have any complaints. There's no heat vents back there as far as I know. That's not great. The climate controls are manual and single zone, which is interesting, and I'm into it, but it's something you're going to have to get used to. The fun part of this feels like a luxury, but remember how last week I was complaining about how the Equinox moved the lighting controls to the infotainment system?
Yes.
So that's not the case in the
you have physical controls for this now.
There's a physical control over to the left of the steering wheel. There's a dial. So it's almost like they spent more money on the Trax than they did on the Equinox interior, which I know isn't true, but it does feel that way. And there was another cool thing that I liked about the Trax that the Equinox didn't have. And that's probably because the Equinox is a wireless charging pad, which my vehicle didn't. You have to buy or maybe it did. I don't remember. But if they did, it wasn't obvious. In the Trax, in between the cup holders, there's a slot where you can stick your phone like straight up or down. Okay, and that's a nice feature. Like almost every car asks you to lie it flat.
Yep.
But this is like, you could still see it if you wanted to. I know you shouldn't be looking at your phone, but let's say you're using navigation and you don't have a windshield mount. You could do that. Because
this car doesn't have, like all the other Chevys doesn't have, does it have Android Auto and Apple CarPlay?
I mentioned that earlier. I knew you weren't paying attention. It has both of those things. It does not have Google.
You slinged it out there quickly.
It does not have Google Apps built in. So you're going to be doing everything through your phone projection.
Okay.
But
sometimes you might not have the cable or whatever, and you need to put your phone somewhere.
Well, you don't need a cable; it's wireless. But the other thing that's nice about that slot is if your phone is plugged in, you can put it in upside down, and your cable isn't going to catch on anything. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Sometimes you put it in like a glove compartment or a little storage nook that's under the center screen, and the cable like catches on something, and you're pulling at your cable connection, and that's no good. So I appreciated that. It's something that's cheap, and it actually adds to the vehicle, which is rare.
Very true. It's weird to me that, like, I find that to be considered a sense of practicality about how people and what people bring into the car and how accommodating it is. So yeah, basically everybody I know has a smartphone and will likely either take it out of their pocket when they get into the car, either to make sure they don't sit on it or whatever, to make sure it's close at hand. We're like attached to these things. So to have a place dedicated for it is smart. It really is clever. And I think it's more so than just putting it flat in a little cubby somewhere. There's more than that. And sometimes there's more than one phone in a car, right? There's passengers and
too many phones, Sammy.
Well, not too many, but
the phones are probably just calling each other too, spying on you.
They should, honestly. The other thing is, like, you'll see other automakers, they'll start like talking about specific sizes for cups and like, what is this whole new I think there was this whole thing with like Stanley sized cups or
that fad seems to have passed everyone by. Are people still talking about it?
I think that there's some automakers that designed the cup holders to like accommodate them.
Well, I think
and those other big ones, what are they called now?
Nalgene. I think what happened was some car companies realized that their cup holders were big enough for these Stanley mugs, and they wanted to piggyback on the hype, and so they just made it a point, to mention
that's true.
I think that.
But then again, the problem is when you have a cup holder that is that big, and you put something that is not that big in, it is not a cup holder. It's basically a spill containment area, right?
Everything I have is that big, Sammy. There's a few other things about the infotainment on the Trax you're gonna have to get used to. If you're in the 1RS, you're stuck with a 4-speaker audio system. It's not fantastic.
No, that doesn't sound fantastic.
Yeah, you can.
It sounds like it would be bad.
There's a 6-speaker. There's a 6-speaker one on higher trim levels. Again, I assume once you get the larger infotainment screen, it comes with its own deal. But
what a huge upgrade! 50% more speakers.
50% more speakers. Yeah. The vehicle drives pretty well. It's got 137
What does that mean?
horsepower.
Is that like in relation to its class, or like what you're expecting size-wise? Or?
So sometimes you get in these little crossovers and they're super buzzy, right? It's like a CVT, it's buzzy, it's annoying, and you really feel like it's straining all the time. Looking at you, Honda HRV, which is a vehicle that remains a low bar for this podcast. But there's a 1.2 liter 3-cylinder turbo in this car.
Whoa, those are all kinds of weird numbers. 1.2 liter, 3-cylinder.
137 horsepower.
That sounds so European.
Well, it sounds more Korean than European to me.
I
believe this is built in Korea. It's 137 horsepower and 162 pound-feet of torque. That's not a lot, but it's small.
137 from a 1.2 is pretty nice.
Yeah, 3 cylinders. Imagine if they had a 4th in there. Or they did like Jaguar style, where it's just like a 4th in the back that's filled in.
Yes. That would be perfect. Wonderful.
So I had no complaints about the motor. The only thing you get that might be off-putting from an engine this size is the same thing you'll get from every small displacement turbo. It sounds like a vacuum when you're on the throttle heavy. There's some throttle hang when you get off. Other than that, I mean, yeah, you got to plan your passes. There were times where I just didn't want to pass someone because I didn't have a confidence that I would get around them before we got to the next corner. I didn't want to take the risk. But with the whole family in the vehicle, we went up to the bottom of a ski hill nearby, which is a 1/4 mile climb. No problems. The only thing I really noticed that was a little odd, every once in a while when I would be on part throttle, it felt like it was lugging the engine, like it didn't want to downshift. Yeah. And that was something I only really noticed with a full load of passengers. There are times where, let's say you're turning a hard corner and you're getting on the throttle after, like let's say you're exiting from a highway or something, there'll be a little bit of stumbling where it's like, I'm not so sure we're going to get all the power right away. Other than that, though, like I said, most of this is small turbo engine stuff. It's not specific to the Trax, and it's not a CVT. It's an 8-speed automatic.
Okay, but that means that when a CVT isn't involved, that sometimes the fuel efficiency can suffer. Does this thing have rough fuel mileage?
It's not great. It's 30 miles per gallon combined, according to the EPA. You're in a very small vehicle. That's not impressive. You know what I mean?
30 is really not that nice. No.
And in the real world, with temperatures hovering around the freezing mark, I saw about 25, 26.
Okay. And it's important to point out that this is a front-wheel drive crossover, not an all-wheel drive one, too.
So to translate that into Canadian, it was I saw 9.2 liters per 100 kilometers.
Wow.
The official city rating is 8.5, and the highway rating is 7.6. So
holy moly! I'm not sure I'm into that.
I honestly was wondering if the fuel tank was smaller than normal, but no,
I'm filling up too much. Yeah,
there are a lot of compact SUVs, larger SUVs that will beat that, hybrid and non-hybrid, or at least match it. In the real world. You mentioned it's front-wheel drive. That wasn't an issue for me because it had winter tires on it. We had a bit of a blizzard on one day when I had the vehicle. It handled it no problems, and the muddy roads around here also weren't an issue. I don't think it will be a problem for anyone who lives in a city, especially. It's hard to think of a time when you absolutely have to have all-wheel drive. I'm sure you might encounter that 1 or 2 times a year, and if you're in the Trax, you'll probably be frustrated by that, but if you want an all-wheel drive vehicle from Chevrolet that's roughly this size, you can get the Trailblazer.
Okay. And
if you want one that's not from Chevrolet, you can get the Kicks, which now has all-wheel drive as an option.
Okay. So the reality, though, is like most of the time you don't really need all-wheel drive.
90% of the time, you don't need it.
And I think that is a totally appropriate, trade-off in terms of pricing, because usually a front-wheel drive car is better priced, but usually it's better on gas.
Yeah,
that fuel mileage is really, really difficult. That sounds like that turbocharged 3-cylinder is really busting it. It's really trying to get going.
There's also there's no adaptive cruise in the vehicle. I know that sounds like it's not a big deal, but you can. Mine had something called. You can add it to the vehicle called using a package called Driver Confidence Package. Otherwise, you get like forward collision warning with braking, you get lane departure warning and lane keeping assist. All that stuff worked fine, but if you want like blind spot monitoring and adaptive cruise, you have to pay more for it. Okay. I like adaptive cruise because of my commute into Montreal. It's really helpful in heavy traffic.
Okay.
But other than that, I mean, it's still decent that it has those other features. Honestly, this is a good basic vehicle. Like when I first started driving, basic cars were awful. They were awful. And they were awful for a long time. And now pretty much every basic car is really good. If this thing was cheaper in Canada, I would wholeheartedly recommend it. Now I have to say drive other stuff too, because especially if you're looking above the base model, like you can start paying a fair amount for the Trax. And at that point, you can look at something like the Crosstrek from Subaru, which has standard all-wheel drive and a bunch of other stuff. Standard, I believe it has standard adaptive cruise because all Crosstreks have eyesight, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So I think the Crosstrek starts around 33. So if you're looking at a Trax and you get to the point where you're paying 33 grand, you're probably going to do the same fuel mileage with all-wheel drive and adaptive cruise in the Crosstrek.
Yeah, the main thing I can think about when it comes to the Crosstrek, it does have a couple of drawbacks. Mainly the CVT can be really like droney, and the Crosstrek is not, and it's not a fast car.
Neither is the Trax though at all.
Yeah, just wanted to point that out. You're not gaining a benefit in that either.
The benefit is the all-wheel drive and the eyesight.
Yeah, those are pretty big. And
it's a bigger
car. Yeah.
It's a bigger vehicle. Yeah. So if you can match the fuel mileage and get even more practicality out of it, that's where I start to lean away from the Trax. Like, I don't think it makes sense to buy a top tier Trax in Canada, especially.
Yeah. I think that adds up because especially with the way they've like increased the base price, just the moment you crest that $30,000 mark, it's like the cheapness no longer is no longer a novelty, right?
Yeah,
it's not there.
It's not there. And you might even be, start to look at Invista at that point.
That's a great point because you're getting a slightly more, accommodating interior.
Yeah, it's a more refined package, and the styling might be. My brother-in-law bought an Invista in, I believe it was early winter or late December, and they're very happy with it.
Interesting. Okay. Did they do a lot of cross shopping? What was else on there?
They were looking at some other stuff. They talked with me about a few different models before they ended up buying it, but they had lasered in on it fairly early on. I think what happened was they ran into a friend or a family friend who had one, and they were taken with it.
Okay.
So that's what steered them in that direction.
Cool. Anything else you want to talk to me about with this Trax or the cheap car segment in general?
No, I mean, it's sad that things are getting more expensive. I don't think there's realistically a smaller vehicle you can tuck in under these subcompacts anymore. Like we're in a world where Mirages are pretty much done and the Versa is gone. So it's like, this is just how it is.
Yeah, it's really problematic to me. I think that cheap cars still have a place. The question is, are cheap cars, we used to say the alternative to a cheap car is like a used car. And you don't get the same, guarantees in terms of reliability or long-term, longevity or ownership goodies.
Yeah, but I'm team used car. I mean,
yeah, I think lately cars have become so good and reliable that a used car, like let's say a 5-year-old car or 4-year-old car, can still be valuable, can still last you another 10 years perhaps. Maybe,
but they're also they're also expensive. Used cars are so expensive these days. It's insane.
You think so?
Yeah. Like, I mean, it's not as bad as it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, but they're still very expensive.
I'm asking you, in terms of an expensive new car or an expensive used car, right? Like,
I'm saying that like if you looked at a Camry that was 3 years old versus a new Camry, there's not a lot of daylight there.
Yeah, but Camrys have that crazy resale value. That's true. That's a very good point. And I don't even know how to answer my own question after you tell me that. I think a 5-year-old used car is still a decent.
I have a 10-year-old used car. Like you're preaching to the choir here.
No, but I mean that allows you to stay within a generation. Like maybe you get in both like a pre-refreshed car or an off-lease car.
But you have to be careful. You want to be careful too, because like sometimes the difference between a 4-year-old used car and a 5-year-old used car is insubstantial. You know? So like really do your homework. True. You know, like you don't necessarily have to go back as far as you think you do for some models. It's almost like there's a point where depreciation just kind of the curve really shallows out.
That's a good point. I tend to look at that like 4 or 5 year mark because that's the usual lease deals, and I try to take a look at like when a car got a redesign or a new generation, and try to determine where I want what features and what design I'm looking for.
You're always looking at Land Rovers too, right? You always want to use Land Rover.
Yeah, no, I want a G-Class. That's what I really want. Ben, we have another thing I want you to discuss, if possible. You had a really cool interview with a movie star, and I would love it if you could let me know what that was like and who that was and why you were talking to them. Because generally, we need to have good reasons to talk to people when we do what we do.
I guess it's been a couple months now. I had a chance to talk to Sung Kang, who's at the Toronto Auto Show. I wasn't at the auto show. I was in the vicinity, and the opportunity came up to talk with him about the new movie that he has. It's called Drifter. And
cool. This is not a Fast and the Furious movie, which is what he's known for, I guess.
Basically, just to get the movie stuff out of the way, it's his first real foray into making a movie himself. He approached the world of drifting with a very different perspective from, say, Fast and Furious in terms of how the movie was produced. He worked with Brian Scotto, who's the one of the co-founders of Hoonigan. And Scotto is the guy who directed Ken Block's Gymkhana videos. And that was really the vibe that he wanted for his movie. And he had worked with Scotto on another movie earlier that didn't end up happening. But he was able to pick his brain during that development period. And Scotto would talk about this thing called the honest angle, which was an approach that he tried to take when he was putting together the Gymkhana videos. And that was to put the viewers in the driver's seat, in the sense that it didn't feel like it was a special effect or a stunt person driving. Like it felt like you were in the car, or you were seeing the car in natural environment, and you were seeing the car moving at speed. There was no CG. There was nothing like that.
Okay.
And so
that's cool.
When Sung Kang was wanting to do this, his own movie, he was like, I want to make a movie that takes this honest angle and applies it to drifting, but like cinematically. And it was a really hard sell. It was really hard for him to convince studios that there was this huge market of people who loved these Gymkhana videos, but weren't being served by a movie that was taking that same type of approach. And they just couldn't understand it. So he ended up having to fund the movie himself. And how that worked was he would be hanging out at his garage, and a friend would show up, a car friend, and he would explain the concept for the movie. And they would be like, I totally get it. And get out their checkbook and be like, how can I get involved?
Cool.
So the movie was largely funded by individual enthusiasts, people in the car community. And that's kind of why he's going around to various auto shows and auto events to talk to the kinds of people who will basically be the same audience for the film as the people who, you know, supported it with their money. It's like a Mobius strip of supported viewers. But it was really cool to talk with him for a number of reasons. The first was he came across as very genuine and personal. We talked about a lot of stuff that was completely unrelated to the movie itself. We talked about the fact that we're both Z owners. He has a couple of S30s. I also have an S30. That's the first generation Datsun Z. And he was just talking about how we were comparing our different philosophies on the racetrack, I was saying that when I'm on the track, I find it very relaxing. It's the only time in my life really where I'm just focused on one thing and not thinking about anything else. And that's primarily so I don't hit a wall, right? Like I have to be really focused and in the moment. And he says that he can't enjoy being on the track because he's too competitive and it just burns him up. And he ends up being obsessively focused about that. But what he really likes to do is go out on canyon drives. And that's a moment where he's able to just relax from behind the wheel. And he enjoys doing that with a Z. But we talked about a couple of things like his first car, which was a 1983 Dodge Monaco that was in the family. And he had been promised this car by his dad. And when he finally got his license, you know, he before he got his license, he and his friends used to sit in the car in the driveway and pretend they were driving it. And he's very excited. And he's 16 years old. And he was, you know, he'd spent all this time building up to this moment. And he goes to get the keys from his dad. And his dad's like, well, do you have insurance for it? And he's like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, he goes, my dad was like a military guy, like teaching him these lessons in what he described as the strictest and cruelest way. And so his dad was like, well, you better get a job so you can get insurance so you can drive this car. So he's like, I never ended up getting the job. And what happened was my dad sold the car to a neighbor and my neighbor ended up driving it. So he had to see it.
That's so brutal.
Yeah. He had to see it driving around his neighborhood with his neighbor behind the wheel and not him. So that was like I guess a teachable moment in a way. His first car that he actually drove was a Tercel D. And he said that he got that in college and he's like, D stands for does not have anything. It was a manual car and it taught him how to drive manual. And he liked it because it was indestructible. Like in the moment, he felt embarrassed driving a little red Toyota around campus, but now he appreciates it, you know, the freedom that comes with it. And he grew up in Georgia before moving to California, where he moved to he moved to Barstow, California, and graduated high school from there. But it was a really big change, just having wheels and getting out in that world. He also talked with a couple other things that maybe didn't make it into the interview. I'm going through my notes here because it was kind of a wide-ranging conversation. But I asked him because he obviously has worked a lot with Vin Diesel. I am a pretty big Fast and Furious fan. So I had to ask him, like, if when he was on the set of Fast and Furious, did he ever get roped into like a Dungeons and Dragons game? Because Diesel is known to be fanatical about it and has a character that he's built up over a very long time. And surprisingly, he told me that no, because on set, he said Diesel is very method and he's totally in character as Dominic Toretto. And he's like, the quote was, Dominic Toretto does not play Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, so, I guess that adds up.
That's a little too bad. But there was one other fun thing that he talked about. I don't know if everyone knows this, but he's gone on record a bunch of times talking about the Toyota Sienna and how much he loves the Sienna. And they had a bunch of Siennas on the set of the movie that they were using. Toyota had given them Siennas and Tacomas, and the Tacomas ended up in front of the camera as like character vehicles for, I believe there's a lot of AE86s in the movie. So some of the drivers would have
anything that has to do with drifting. There's the 86s involved.
Yeah. So the Tacomas were being driven as like dailies by the characters, but they couldn't find a way to get the Sienna in front of the camera, but it was behind the scenes all the time. And apparently they got beat up pretty bad just by how often they were being used, right? Like it was, they were very appreciative to have these vehicles, but, what he did talk about was he loves the Sienna. He says it's a really great vehicle as a daily. And I asked him, he's talked about it on previous podcasts. And I asked him like where his love for the Previa came from, or sorry, the Previa, the Sienna. And he's like, a long time ago, he was working on a baseball movie that was being filmed in Hawaii. And there was, I believe, a coach that was in the movie who was teaching him how to look like a ball player on camera. And the coach was always driving the Sienna around. And he thought it was really weird. He had a Tacoma and like one of the earliest Siennas. And he found out that this dude was very wealthy, like one of the richest people on the island in Hawaii where they lived. Okay. And he thought it was weird. He's like, why does this guy have like these super modest vehicles? So he asked the coach about it. And the coach was like, look, if you drive a Sienna there's three things you're going to find out about the person who either drives or owns this type of vehicle. He's like, the first is he's a family person because he has family values. He's driving this family vehicle. If he's proud of having a Sienna, that's what it means. But he's like, number two, he doesn't care what other people think about him. Like, he's secure in his self-image. This is a vehicle that he's driving for himself and not for anyone else. And he's like, the third thing is he knows the value of $1 because the resale on a Sienna is really good. And,
that's right.
And he told me, I didn't put this in the article either, but he said that he had a lease Sienna for like a really long time. And his friend wanted to buy it out from him when the lease was over. It was like a $23,000 buyout. But what happened was, when he brought it back to Toyota, Toyota paid him $10,000 to sell it back to them. So he made money leasing that car because of how intense the demand was. So he's like, Sienna, one of the best cars ever made. Anyway,
it's not easy. Yeah. When the automaker themselves are paying you for it. Yeah. You gotta go for it.
So it was a fun conversation. I've been watching him act since his first movie, Better Luck Tomorrow. Or at least his first mainstream movie, which he made with Justin. Damn it, I can't remember his name now. He directed a bunch of Fast and Furious movies. No? Justin Lin, that's right. They had collaborated on that, and there's a lot of talk that his character in that movie from the early 2000s is Han in the Fast and Furious movies. And
it was like this weird non-canon, or is it non-canon?
It's their headcanon, right? Like, as they developed
it's this really cool headcanon. I like it. I think it's one of my favorite, like, pseudo, if you're in the know, you know, kind of things.
Definitely recommend that movie if you haven't seen it. It's about a group of students in California who start basically living a little bit of a criminal lifestyle and get in over their heads fairly quickly. I very much enjoy it. I come back periodically and watch it, but I enjoyed the conversation with him. Drifter doesn't have a release date as of yet that I know of. So if you want to see it, I can't tell you when that's going to happen, but hopefully soon. And just a shout out to someone who, throughout the course of our conversation, genuine car person, not just leaning on the community to promote a film, someone who enjoys doing many of the things that many of the people listening to this podcast do. And if you think about it, there aren't a lot of people in Hollywood who are like that. There have been, big names like Paul Newman and Steve McQueen who were notorious for their on-track exploits. There was Jason Priestley, who was, I believe, really into cars and did some racing. I believe it was Priestley. He's Canadian, right?
Priestley? I think so.
Is it Priestley who's Canadian? Yeah. He did some racing and then he had a bad accident. He had to get out of it for health reasons. And then there's the guy who plays...
Would we like him if he was not Canadian?
Well, it's just because I'm trying to remember. I read his autobiography and he's Canadian, but I couldn't remember if I had the right name.
Yeah,
so because there were a bunch of pretty boys on 90210. I can't remember them all, Sammy. I know that's.
I can't believe you don't.
You have all the posters and the NKOTB stuff, but I don't have that easily accessible. Then there's the guy who plays McDreamy on what is it? Not Ally McBeal, Grey's Anatomy.
Great.
Patrick somebody.
Okay.
Do you know who I'm talking about?
No.
He does a lot of racing.
Okay. Oh, Dempsey.
Patrick Dempsey. Yeah. So those are like kind of the pantheon.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
They're like the pantheon of car people in Hollywood. And I think you have to add him to that. Like he's right up there.
Well, I appreciate him because he's a different person. Like, it also feels like he's not exploiting the enthusiast base for like his own personal gain. It feels like he's actually like speaking to the audience, which I think
like
is
he's
really
part
rare.
of a community.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And giving back, I think, is important.
No, I also think that there's like an authenticity to it.
For sure.
His form of at least from what it looks like in this movie is really like kind of grassroots rather than like something a little bit more, I don't know, like really like high-end race car-y stuff. So I really appreciate looking and watching and seeing somebody who's like with the people when they're showing these kinds of movies, these things on the big screen.
Semi, if people want to ask us questions like we asked him questions, how can they do that?
Oh, you want to grill us like we did to him? We just need to go to our website, unnamedautomotivepodcast.com. When you get there, there's a contact form on the website. Fill that out. It lands in our inbox. If you don't want to go through all of that, just send an email to benjamin@benjaminhunting.com or send a message to us on social media. You can find both of us on Instagram. I'm at Sammy_Happy Ha, like you're laughing, H-A. And you can find Ben, he's at Hunting Benjamin.
What are you going to be driving next week, Sammy?
I am not sure yet, actually. I can't remember if I've confirmed what I've got next week. It might be a car. It might not be. Very mysterious.
I'm going to be talking about the Mazda 3 sedan. Not mysterious at all.
Not mysterious at all. Very cool. We haven't talked about Mazda 3 in a long time.
And also this weekend, I get my Cadillac out of storage, which means all 3 of my cars will be on the road soon. The Jeep has been licensed, and the Datsun is getting a roll bar installed and the new fuel tank installed finally. I'm dropping it off tomorrow. So in theory, they'll all be working at the same time, which is very nice.
Very exciting. I'll talk to you then.
Yeah, thank you for listening, everybody.
Bye-bye.